Israel Update with Gadi and Mike Duran. Hello and welcome to Tablet's Israel Update. It's been 263 days since this war began. It is now the 25th of June. It's a Tuesday. And I'm Gadi in Tel Aviv, while Mike Duran is far, far away from the Hudson headquarters. Where are you, Mike?
I'm in an undisclosed secure location, Gadi. I'm not going to tell you where I am.
Can you tell us which continents?
No.
No. Okay. I'll just say the time zone is not as different as it is usually. And the rest will remain under wraps until we have a committee of investigation, of inquiry, I think they call it, as we shall speak about soon. But Mike, so first, why don't you start with the news bulletin?
Okay. So since we last talked last week, Prime Minister Netanyahu posted a short video accusing the United States of withholding arms shipments. By now, anyone who's interested in Israeli-U.S. relations has heard a lot about that, but the reverberations continue. In the second item, Defense Minister Gallant is in Washington today, where he met with Secretary of Defense Austin, Secretary of State Blinken, Special Envoy Hochstein, and CIA Director Burns. Gallant discussed a range of issues, including the ceasefire hostage negotiations deal with, or the proposed deal with Hamas, the pace and scope of arms shipments to Israel, and the escalating tensions between Israel and Lebanon. Citing unnamed informed sources, the press is now reporting, Gadi, that the United States is expected to release some of the arms shipments to Israel in the coming days. We'll have more. You and I will have more to say about that in a minute. In a third item, sources which the Daily Telegraph in England has described as whistleblowers at the Beirut airport told the Telegraph that they were concerned about the increasing weapons supplies from direct flights to Lebanon from Iran. What they're saying basically is Iran is sending missiles to Hezbollah to the Beirut airport, that's the civilian airport. They're not just using it for transit, but they're also being stored there at the airport. And Hezbollah reportedly has free run of the airport. That's caused a lot of stir. You and I think we'll have to talk about that a little bit as well. In a fourth item, Prime Minister Netanyahu made two major statements in the last week. One was on Sunday on Channel 14. He met with the Patriots, and he gave a long 45-minute interview. And then yesterday, yesterday, that's Monday, he gave a speech in the Knesset where he answered critics and discussed war aims. Today's Israeli press is full of discussions of Netanyahu's speech and also the interview on Sunday. The press is focused in on what Netanyahu had to say about a potential hostage for prisoner deal. I've got a few things I want to talk to you about with regard to the speech and the statement, and they have nothing to do with that, but we'll get to that later. And then finally, a decision was made by a commission of inquiry that was formed under the Bennett government to look into the submarines and naval vessels affair. And the decision was made to send warning letters to individuals that were subject to the inquiry, including Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon. Let's talk about that a little bit too, Gadi. But over to you now.
So I suggest before we do anything else, why don't we play Netanyahu's short message to Blinken that started the whole weapons withholding debacle. Here are the 30 seconds of what Netanyahu said.
When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, "Give us the tools, we'll do the job." And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
I'm glad that you posted that, Gadi, because very few press outlets posted the video, and when they quoted it, they didn't quote it accurately. They always put it in they didn't quote it in its entirety, and they left out the key element that I think is one of the key elements at the end where he talks about Iran, because the press habitually, that's the American press and that's the Israeli press, habitually presented it as an argument about arms for Gaza. And as you know, I don't think that that's what it was at all. I wrote an article, if I can flack my own article here, for Tablet magazine called Biden's Italian Strike, in which I argued that in fact the administration was holding up weapons to Israel. They're doing it under the pretext of following normal procedures, because of course I wrote it in response to the press to the press response to Netanyahu's statement, because the press took its cues from the White House. The White House immediately came out after the statement and said, "We don't know what he's talking about. He's totally delusional. This is just we're really all totally scratching our heads." They completely gaslighted him. Then I wrote my article, and then the Israeli press came out with more details, affirming what Netanyahu was saying. And then the administration changed it changed its tune, and it said, "Well, okay, we're not withholding arms, but we used to fast track them, and now we're no longer fast tracking them and just going through normal procedures," which is the cover story. That's what an Italian strike is. An Italian strike is where you don't do the work, but then when your boss says, "Why aren't you doing the work?" you give lots of explanations that are connected to normal procedures. You're just meticulously following the rules, and that's why nothing is happening. Anyway, it's an amazing episode, and now we saw in the news today, of course, that Gallant is in Washington, and the Americans, while following normal procedures, are all of a sudden starting to send the weapons again.
I was tempted to ask you if in Italy there are also Italian strikes, but then I remember that you are in undisclosed location. So you pointed right at the heart of it, and anticipating your interpretation. I was on Israeli TV a few times after the Netanyahu video, which I applauded, and I said this one sentence where he says, "Iran, give us the tools to fight the job with Iran, which is our common enemy," is what the IDF calls knock on roof, which you know, but maybe our listeners don't all know. It's when you throw a very small bomb that makes a lot of noise on a building, meaning a larger bomb is coming and people should get out. So that was a knock on roof before his speech to the joint session of Congress, which is scheduled for July 24th, in which he can mention in various degrees of clarity the fact that America is appeasing Iran or not doing enough for Iran, or just telling the Americans that we are fighting your war with Iran, thus hinting that the war is not being fought by anyone else, and certainly not by this administration. He can, of course, go further and say, "Why have you released all this money by letting them bypass the sanctions? Why are you protecting their proxies? Why are you not doing anything?" and so forth. I don't think he will go that far, but I think there was also a threat in this little video, and that threat is, I can embarrass this administration over its Iran policy if they don't cooperate more fully.
I totally agree, and I argued in the article that I wrote that all of the fight over Rafah is not about whether to go into Rafah or not, and the the great pressure that the administration has been putting on the Israelis to bring the war to an end now is not about Gaza, and it's not about the humanitarian cost in Gaza like they claim, or it's not primarily about those things. It's really about Lebanon and stopping the war in Gaza now so that the war in Lebanon will also stop. That's the one they're worried about, because it's the war in Lebanon is where the where Israel's war impinges directly on America's effort to find a regional accommodation with Iran. So it throws their whole Iran policy into disarray. And that's what they're really trying to save here, is their concept of regional order.
But if I may draw on your work further, Mike, and especially on the article you wrote with Tony Badran, the now classic, infamous, the realignment, then what I would say, and correct me if I'm not being precise enough, is that America has two tiers or two layers in terms of its PR. It's presenting its policy in the Middle East as a new version of the containment policy vis-a-vis the communist bloc of old. But what it is actually doing is not even détente. It's an attempt to reach a region-wide accommodation, which will force America's allies to, quote Obama, share the neighborhood with Iran and create a new balance between the Shiites and the Sunnis, or the Sunnis and Israelis on the one hand and the Shiites on the other. And so this policy is based on basically misleading the American public. And therefore, Netanyahu is coming right to the heart of Washington and is going to hold the microphone in a delicate situation where he can bring into collision what the administration says and what the administration does. And all this very close to an American election and with the bomb of Lebanon ticking in the background. So we understand that Netanyahu now can just smear the egg on Biden's face. That will probably have a high price. My question is to you, Mike, is there a way to leverage this into a more effective policy in Lebanon by just hinting that he could embarrass Biden and not fully going out against him?
I think he's already doing it. I agree 100% with your interpretation about the knock on the roof. I think the fact that they are now releasing the weapons shows that they can definitely be embarrassed. They cannot admit publicly what their policy really is. And it isn't the share the neighborhood. That's a phrase that Obama used. But if you look at what they're actually doing, they are actually downgrading Israel and downgrading Saudi Arabia and creating a regional order where they negotiate over the heads of the Israelis and the Saudis with the Iranians. That's what the maritime border agreement in Lebanon is all about. That's where Hochstein's draft agreement, or the ceasefire agreement that he's trying to broker, that's what it does. And that's what the Americans and the Iranians did to the Saudis and the Emiratis in Yemen. It's a whole view of the region in which the allies of the United States take on the status of the proxies in the American system, of the proxies of Iran in the Iranian system.
You know, our colleague, I might call her, Caroline Glick, who has an amazing show. We urge you to also look that up. It's called the Caroline Glick Show in Focus. So I had her on a show of mine here in Israel, and she said the way she described it, it's just very tangible. She said, and it's exactly what you are saying. She said America is trying to place Israel under the umbrella of negotiations between the real powers, Iran and the United States, downgrading Israel to the level of Hezbollah. So Israel is an American proxy, Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy. The adults will reach an accommodation and the children should just get along.
That's exactly the way it works. That's exactly the way it works. And the administration does it cleverly. Without part of the reason it doesn't admit that it's doing is because if it admitted that, there would be huge outcry, including in the pro-Israel community. But if they are clever about the way they present it, then elements of the pro-Israel community will come in behind them and support it and say that they're really trying to do the right thing by Israel. It's one of the amazing things about the realignment. By the way, this isn't just about the negotiations with Hezbollah. The realignment has always included the element of elevating the Palestinian question higher than anything else in our relations with Israel, and simultaneously attacking the Likud extreme right-wing governments and suggesting that there's a way in which the United States and Israel can get along very well, and that's if Israel will just dispense with its right wing. What they're really saying is settle down to the definition of what Israel's rights are according to the United States. We define what's legitimate for you to defend and not to defend, not your internal processes. We decide, and then we want to work with the faction in Israel that we like. That's all part of this regional vision.
I want to add 2 points to that. One is that you and I interviewed Secretary Mike Pompeo after he left office on these questions and asked him, what is the difference between the Trump Middle Eastern policy, the Trump administration's Middle Eastern policy, and Obama's? And what he said, it had 3 legs. One, Iran is the problem and not the solution. Secondly, we need to bypass the Palestinian veto on peace between Israel and Arab states. And third, we need to keep he didn't say plausible, a convincing, deterring military force in the region. So
that's it. That's a beautiful summary of what the alternative policy is.
And he was right on that. And the second thing is that we keep repeating here is that the American administration, or this administration at least, is almost completely blind as to internal Israeli politics. It is unaware that after October 7, the 2-state solution is dead in Israel, whether or not Likud is in power, and that this is not an extremist view unless, the 2/3 of Israel are on the extreme side of the political spectrum, and only 1/3 is somehow in the middle. Of course, the picture is different, and that third is now a very radical faction. Note that even Benny Gantz is consistently refusing to say that he would support a Palestinian state. So this means that even at the center, you can't sell the 2-state solution to an Israeli public and expect to be elected. Now, Mike, I want to move on to Netanyahu's 2 statesmen.
Right, good.
One was in the Knesset, a very impressive speech, which was greeted by the opposition with a whole lot of shouting. Some the chair, what do you call it in America? The chair of the
speaker.
The speaker, Mr. Amir Ohana, actually ordered some of the members of Knesset out after they refused to stop shouting. But Netanyahu gave a clear speech, and he also went to the program called The Patriots, which we should talk about one day because it's a whole revolution in Israeli television, and it's driving the mainstream media wild. It's a half satirical, half serious political show with very sharp, witty pundits clearly on the right. But the fact that Netanyahu is coming there means that he has resigned himself to the fact that in the mainstream media, they are just competing in who would be more heroic in shouting him down than about trying to understand what the prime minister's views are. And so he made a clear line. He's not coming to these studios. Mind you, that he did a year ago. Even in the beginning of the battle of the reform, he still would. Now he clearly doesn't. And so I think this connects to the former subject, because he was asked and he talked about the current state of the war and the future state of the war. So how would you sum up his position or the way he presents it?
It's directly related to what we were just talking about, and but before we do that, can I just lay out what the Israeli mainstream media is not talking about that at all. What they're talking about is the hostages for prisoners deal. So let me just quickly tell you what they're saying, because I think it's kind of interesting, and it'll probably reverberate in the United States today. So on the Patriots on Sunday, Netanyahu said that he was willing to accept a partial deal. So basically, stage one of Biden's three stages. The stage one is all the living hostages who are civilians. Basically, I may have it a little bit wrong. Stage two are the soldiers, and then stage three is the rebuilding of Gaza. But what Hamas wants, what Biden wants, is he wants stage one to basically end the war. It's theoretically a temporary ceasefire, but as long as good faith negotiations are going on, the ceasefire will continue. And Biden wants the ceasefire to become a permanent ceasefire. That, of course, is also what Hamas wants. It wants a guarantee from Israel that there will be an end to the war and a withdrawal of all the troops. Netanyahu keeps saying that he'll accept these stages, but that the war will continue until its goals of defeating Hamas politically and militarily are finished. And his continuous insistence on the fact that the war will continue, this won't lead to the complete end of the war, is being presented by the White House as scuttling the deal, which he supposedly agreed to. I don't think he's ever agreed to it, because he's been consistent on this every time. But when he said a partial deal on Sunday, according to the Israeli press today, this created a firestorm between Washington and Jerusalem, in addition to the firestorm over the arms question. And the Americans insisted that he must come out and himself, not through a spokesman, he must publicly accept the deal offered by President Biden. And they're saying that that's what he did in his speech before the Knesset, which you just lauded. Personally, I don't see the big difference between. Yes, he came out and said that he accepted Biden's deal. I don't see the big shift between the two, and I don't see any inconsistency between what he said on Sunday, what he said on yesterday, and what he's been saying all along. But that's where the press is, and they're hammering away on this. Personally, what I found most interesting about both the interview and the speech is that the war aims are shifting, and it's a subtle thing. It's a subtle thing, and it's not official yet. But originally, the war aims did all focus on Gaza, and of course, as far as we know, there has only been a cabinet decision about the war aims in Gaza, and the war aims are to return the hostages and destroy Hamas militarily, and destroy it politically. Increasingly, though, when Netanyahu talks, he's adding this is a style issue, and you can find statements all along where he's mentioned Iran and mentioned Hezbollah and so on. But I think now it's becoming much more part of his standard talking points. And if you go and you listen to how detailed he was in the speech about returning everybody to their homes in the north, which is going to require putting significant pressure on Hezbollah. And he's also talking about this as a war with Iran. And he talked about this is a 7-front war against Iran. And he said, this is going to take a huge effort against Iran.
Let's just mention, Mike, the 7 fronts, because I know this issue has been confusing a lot of people.
Oh, so the seven fronts are Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and the Houthis. Is that 7?
Yeah, it's 7.
Yeah. This is, I think, directly related to your analysis about the knock on the roof. He is laying the groundwork for a speech. I have no information. This is what I think, that the great power of the last speech that he gave before both houses of Congress was that he explained the connection to the American public between the nuclear deal and the explosion of Iranian influence all around the Arab world. And he knows that that's what he did in the last one, and I think he's going to go do the same thing in this one. Now, he's going to have to be mindful because of the need for decent relations with Washington and the dependency on Israel for armaments from the United States, not to go stick his thumb too deep into the eyeball of Biden in Washington. But he's already talking about the 7-front war against Iran and so on, so that this is part of his public rhetoric. So when he goes to Washington, it's not a big change. That's what I think is going on.
So 2 things about that too. First, I think this may be put in a context of a larger theme, which I think Netanyahu hopes, certainly I hope, and many Israelis hope, will gradually shift in the public consciousness of the whole democratic world, is that Israel is in the forefront of a war for civilization against barbarism. If you will, the Samuel Huntington model of a clash of civilizations, and that we are fighting. The war against Iran is the war of the Judeo-Christian culture. It's a huge, it is a momentous war. I think he'll sound that theme, and
I hope he doesn't sound the theme that you just said. I hope he focuses on Iran, because
I think
there are plenty of Muslims on our side in this fight, and if you say Judeo-Christian, you put them outside of the.
But I think that in his mind, I don't know, tactically you may be right, and it may not be a good idea to say it here, but I think that's nevertheless the truth, and the truth that he believes that this war is no longer just a Middle Eastern war. It's a worldwide war against a jihadist form of Islam. And what we see in Europe and what we see in American campuses are different manifestations of the same conflict. And in this sense, I think that the comparisons to the 1930s abound. But I think that we should remember that the Jews, at least the Jewish state, in this version, is not just like the Jews of the 1930s. It's also like Britain on the 1930s. We are on the front. We are fighting the Nazis. It's as Churchill was fighting alone in 1940 and beginning of 1941. England stood alone against the Nazis. Now Israel is alone fighting the war with the new Nazis of Tehran, and the war is the war of the whole West. So the disagreement between us, Mike, if I may try to define it, is that you say this is the war of the West against Iran, and I'm saying this is a clash of civilizations, and this is just its flashpoint.
Actually, this is interesting. I wasn't expecting this. I think that the number one enemy is not Islamism and it's not Iran. I think the number one enemy is wokeism, and Iran is such a threat because Iran is being empowered in the Middle East by a woke American foreign policy, exactly as the student agitators for Palestine are being empowered by college administrators. Just like I didn't look at it deeply because I'm at an undisclosed location doing undisclosed secure things, a secure undisclosed location doing secure undisclosed things. But but I saw there was an episode in Los Angeles at a synagogue, and the police basically, it looked like from the little, I didn't look it deeply into it, but I looked at a few tweets from friends and things, and it looked like the police were protecting the masked pro-Palestine protesters who were blocking people from going to their synagogue to just go about their normal routine. And that if they just enforce the law, if they just enforce the law and move those idiots away from the synagogue and let the Jews go to shul like they normally do, then everything is fine. The idiots are off in a corner screaming and howling, but they're not bothering anybody. But the authorities come in and actually empower them to do this disruption. Same thing with the Black Lives Matter and so on.
Can we start talking, do you think, about systemic anti-Semitism? Because apparently
Sure.
it's much more prevalent. I'm looking through my Twitter feed as we speak, because I quoted a rabbi, and I want to remember what his name was, who said, if this was a Ku Klux Klan rally besieging a Baptist church in Los Angeles, all these people would be in jail, and the whole media would have been screaming bloody murder.
Totally. So it's empowered by the authorities, and then it creates this impression when you have all these intifadas in all the universities, and increases this impression that there's all kinds of grassroots movement out there, when the average person looks at that and thinks, this is ridiculous. Why are we tolerating it? We don't need to tolerate it. And if we just stop tolerating it, the world changes very quickly. And we don't have to tolerate Iran. Iran is a weak country with lots of vulnerabilities. And all we have to do is show them that we are really willing to hammer them where they're most vulnerable. And if we do that, it's a new world.
Yeah. So let me go back again to it and try a third rephrasing. I've been dealing with wokeness. I think I can say before anyone else in Israel. Probably that's not exactly true, but more or less true. I wrote a book against it almost 30 years ago. It was 1997 when I was still on the left. It was a critique of the radical left from the left, and it was clear to me already back then, and I think now it's almost common knowledge, that this is an autoimmune disease, wokeness. And the fact that it has teamed up with radical anti-Western, jihadist, anti-Semitic Islam is not a coincidence. This autoimmune disease attacks the body in exactly the place where we had immunity to racism on the part of the other. Since the whole framework of the whole moral framework has shifted, as Batya Unger Sargon so sharply put it, it replaced the idea of good and evil with the idea of strong and weak. So if you are strong, you're guilty, and if you're weak, no matter what atrocity you commit, you're still on the side of the right. And this has been exploited everywhere. Nobody's talking about mosques in North America where anti-Semitism violent anti-Semitism is habitually preached. And why? Because of this autoimmune disease. When you come to Jewish leaders with this information, what they want to know first is how not to seem Islamophobic. And under the same guise, you have someone like Linda Sarsour promoting Sharia law, which treats women like cattle and demands execution of gays, as if this was the multicultural cause of the week. And in the end, and I saw it with my own eyes, Queers for Palestine, do we know this? I saw it 3 or 4 years ago in Columbia University. There was a little notice I went there to interview Mark Lilla, who just published a new book, and I saw this post about an evening colloquium that gays were holding in support of Palestine. So all these are connected, and this is why I say that this is a fight for the future of the Judeo-Christian culture. It's a fight for our moral outlook, and this is the autoimmune disease that we are fighting, through which Iran too is penetrating.
No, I think so. What I think is at stake. How did you put it? Quoting Bacha Unger Sargon.
That instead of good and evil, you have weak and strong.
Shorten her name to Sargon. It's a much more. Sorry, and then she could just be a person like Cher. She wouldn't have to be Bacha Sargon, because if it was just Sargon. Sargon says. Sorry,
but there's a Sargon of Akkad. You know that?
Exactly. Yes.
There's an actual king, but there's also an anti-woke pundit who calls himself Sargon of Akkad.
But if she just called herself Sargon and there was a Sargon, then it would be. I suggested that once to her years ago, but anyway, if she'd have listened to me, she'd be very big now, much bigger than she is. Anyway, listen. What did she say? Strong and weak?
Strong and weak instead of right and wrong.
No, the essential, in my mind, the essential fight is between classic liberalism and left-wing authoritarianism, and or based on authoritarianism, based on identity politics. They want to set up a system where there is a vanguard party, just like the Communist Party. I'm not, analogous to the Communist Party, that is running the show, and it allows you to participate in the debate according to your primordial identities, and it has ranked those identities according to its ranking about which ones are most oppressed, and therefore their opinion is more valid. But it has nothing to do with the actual opinion of people who come from those categories. It's the vanguard party that determines which of those opinions is actually acceptable or unacceptable. And it's doing it very much with the intention of destroying classic liberalism, where the individual is the sovereign. I'm not sure if I'm using the right political terms, but that's the key difference here. And what they do is they create these categories, they create these organizations. They don't create them, they latch on to them, and they use them like guided missiles against their liberal enemies. They're doing it now. What is, you can say that the Palestine cause, in the way you originally formulated it, the Palestine cause is the global jihad's attack on Israel, and you could say that we could argue about that. There's in some ways that makes sense, but what I see is the Palestine cause is the way the global left is downgrading Israel and all of those people in the West who support Israel, because all of those people line up perfectly as the enemies of identity politics as practiced by the left. Mm-hmm. Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a topic that we should return to. I have a lot to say about it, and especially I think that it's misunderstood by Americans as part of their misunderstanding of themselves, and by the right-wing critics of it, because there is also a very strong element that's a residue of individualism. Mind you also that identity politics in the end fragment completely into the idea that only I will define who I am, which you can trace back not to Karl Marx, but to Ralph Waldo Emerson, who thought the self is always a project in making. And so now I will decide if I'm a male or a female, and no one except the imperial self, as one one author called it, will decide who I am. But that is a very complicated question, and I think we should devote an episode to wokeness. What do you say? Because I think
I just agreed to write an article about a dimension of this, and so let's wait until after I write my big article. So like 7 years from now.
Okay. I've been dealing with this for 30 years. I can do 30 more. Not a problem.
Can I just have one last word here?
You can always have the last word, Mike.
Yeah, because this is why it sounds very theoretical, but it's not. It becomes it's a serious strategic question. What is the enemy and what are we fighting for? Because a lot of people are looking at those problems on the campuses and they're saying Qatar, 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 and I reject that almost completely because it is the uses to which Qatar's money is being put by the people in charge. The people in charge are not Islamists. The people in charge are opening up a space to Islamism, channeling it in certain directions in order to weaken their domestic American enemies, which is the right.
Yep, and this is also an explanation of why the demonstrators against Netanyahu here and the demonstrators against Israel there are equally tied to the Democrat Party. But we have to move on to Lebanon. And on the heels of our discussion of the Prime Minister's speech, which emphasized the North, I want to also note, before we talk about the airport issue and the storing of weapons in civilian facilities, also say that many on the right were disappointed to hear that the Prime Minister said that we are working towards, or possibly working towards, a diplomatic solution or an agreement that would solve the problem with the northern border, while people like myself, people like one of my favorite commentators, Professor Avi Bar-Eli, who had a piece about this in yesterday's newspaper, believe that we will have no choice but to eventually go to war with Hezbollah. Is that a possibility?
I think it is a possibility. In fact, if I had to bet, I'd say that there's going to be a serious escalation in the north. I'm not sure it's going to happen in the next couple of weeks, which is what we keep hearing. I think it's more likely to be in a month or two. But these things, as Avi Bar-Eli, it was in Israel Today, Israel Hayom Today. That article you're talking about, and I don't know if that's probably does everything in Israel Hayom get translated into English? I don't know.
Not much of it. Did you read it in English?
No, in Hebrew.
So I don't think most things don't get translated, actually.
It's a really good piece. Maybe I'll translate it and just tweet it and stick it. I'll machine translate it and then stick it on Twitter.
Well worth it, because one of the points Avi makes is that we have an indication here. The people will either return to their homes or not return to their homes. We can sign papers. The government can do that. But if people don't return home, it means that the paper is going to be worthless. And what Avi said is we have to go to war with Hezbollah at one point or another. And actually, and this goes back to so many things we said about how this administration is sabotaging its own policies. If the Americans are going to withhold weapons, this can actually push Israel to increase and enlarge its first strike on all infrastructure in Lebanon. Because if we begin to calculate and see that we don't have enough ammunition and backing for a long war of attrition, then we need to do what in Hebrew so succinctly is captured in the phrase Zbeng vegamarnu. How would you translate Zbeng vegamarnu, Mike?
Bang and we're done. One exactly. And done. Basically, the big dramatic shock and awe. The big dramatic move, and then it's all over. and I just to build on what you're saying, the American policy also increases the likelihood of an expansion of the war to Iran, because the Israelis are not going to concede the north of their country to Hezbollah. That's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So, and if Iran is threatening to enter the war, if Israel escalates against Hezbollah, then the Israelis are going to have to think about how to take care of Iran. And if the United States is not going to deter Iran, they're going to have to think about deterring it themselves. And so one thing leads to another. The Americans keep thinking that they put pressure on the Israelis, that then what's going to happen is the Israelis are just going to buckle, or what's going to happen is that the Iranians and their proxies are going to see how nice America is being to them, and they're going to come with concessions to America, which has never happened. So we have this whole pattern now. It's a very clear pattern from the beginning of the war. You'll remember, I can't remember if it was late December or early January, but it was around about that time frame when Blinken came to, I think it was in December. He came, maybe it could have been even November. Let me just say, I don't remember when, but you remember Blinken came and he said, he was quoted in the press as saying, "You don't have months, you have weeks." Right? Your time is running out. You basically have to start winding this thing down. So clearly the administration thought that they could turn this into another Gaza round like all of the previous Gaza rounds, when the Israeli public is saying, no, this one is different. By the way, Netanyahu talked about that with the Patriots on Sunday.
So, so in that framework, the fact that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Charles Brown, is saying that if the war escalates with Hezbollah and with Iran, America will not be able to offer Israeli protection. How does that figure in the policy?
This does worry the Israelis. It worries the Israelis for sure. There's no doubt about it. And the thing that it worries them the most is the Iron Dome question. They need the ammunition from the United States. The interceptors, they're made in the United States, and they need the assistance of CENTCOM, the integrated missile defense with CENTCOM, and they need the American Navy as well. That when Iran attacked Israel on the April 12th, it was not just CENTCOM. It was also extra American. It was Israeli capabilities combined with allied capabilities, in the Arab militaries that helped out, and then also American. One of the ballistic missiles, or several of the ballistic missiles, I can't remember, were shot down by American systems coming off of American ships in the Mediterranean. Not having that is tremendously worrying to the Israelis, and it means the Israelis might decide to delay the action as a result of that. I doubt that they would, but they might decide to delay as a result of that. But if they can't rely on the Americans, then they're going to look to go take care of it themselves, and they're going to go and they're going to hammer Hezbollah, like you said, like there's no tomorrow, and they're going to do it very quickly. And they might also go and attack Iran to tell Iran that they'll send a very clear message to Iran that if you attack, we'll take out your nuclear sites or do something worse.
Something worse, maybe. I don't want to open a whole discussion of what can be attacked in Iran, but just to remind our listeners that Iran has a vulnerable economy, and if Israel decides to wreak havoc on its oil industry, for instance, then that can be great damage. So
I looked at we're now talking. This is an existential war. This is not the little regional conflict that the Americans are trying to create. They're creating the opposite. And they have already created the opposite. We already have, for the first time in history, the largest ballistic missile barrage ever sent by one country against another. And the first time that Iran has ever attacked Israel directly like this. This has never happened before. That is a product of the American policy. So what we're going to see is just the next stage of the widening of the war thanks to the American policy of trying to of so diligently working to contain it in Gaza.
So Mike, maybe one day you and I be able to
just to finish the thought.
Sure.
There's no doubt in my mind that, and I have no information, but there's no doubt in my mind that they are actually sitting in Jerusalem and talking about whether they have the ability to decapitate the regime in Tehran.
So maybe one day, Mike, you and I, when we retire, would sit back. Maybe we could start smoking cigar just because it's picturesque, and lean back and say that all our work, and certainly your work of many years now, has just been redundant because the United States has destroyed its own policy. They just did it themselves.
Oh yeah. Well, that's occurred to me actually. Look, if this woke revolution actually wins, and we do have a vanguard party that that decides that I already get told when I'm talking to people, including it becomes part of our normal discourse to say, well, yeah, you would think that because you're an old white man, right? So whatever argument I made, whatever perception I had, doesn't count because it's the perception.
No. But that's not where I was leading at all. What I was saying is that the appeasement of Iran is defeating itself because America is driving itself to a war with Iran by.
I misunderstood.
All our work has been for us.
The fastest way to get what we want is actually by not getting what we want.
By them doing our work. I mean, by them ruining their own policy.
Yes,
that might happen.
That had never occurred to me. But the interesting thing about war is it's full of paradoxes.
Mike, I think we don't have time for submarines. Maybe we should postpone that for next time because it says.
I want to make one sentence about the submarines. Literally one sentence.
Okay, but we have to explain what it is if we do that. So give an introductory sentence too.
So the Bennett government, there was this claim that Netanyahu made decisions to buy submarines from Germany, and he made the decision by going around the entire all of the career bureaucrats, all the people whose job it is to think about military acquisitions, and he basically made it on his own and didn't explain it to anyone. And this is, I don't know, a submarine costs what, $4 billion, $3 billion, or the total deal with, I don't know the numbers, but the numbers are large, $2 billion. I don't know. We're talking about in billions of dollars. And there was a suggestion that he did it to enrich a relative who was somehow involved with the deal. All that they have apparently approved, I'm going by press statements, is that normal bureaucratic procedures were not followed here. What Netanyahu is suggesting, in his speech, he suggested it yesterday, I think it's very interesting, is he didn't use these words. This is me adding to it. But what he's signaling is that, yes, I ignored the normal procedures because these are not normal threats, and we need a second strike capability against Iran. And the submarines give us this. That's where I think he's headed. Now, he's not going to say any of this because this is all about secret capabilities and exactly what the submarines have. But what he's arguing is, I've been focused on the real threat. We're fighting for our lives against Iran, and that's why I didn't listen to the petty bureaucrats who you are trying to use now to take me down. And it's a pretty powerful argument, I would say.
Look how far we've gone to accepting the authority of the deep state, where a prime minister is accused for not doing what his underlings told him to do. This is completely ironic. But in Israel, we have a whole culture in which That's, by the way, the name of my Hebrew podcast, Gatekeeper, in which the civil servants see themselves as the gatekeeper. And what is the gate and what is the fence? The gate they are keeping is at the fence where politicians, wild politicians, should be stopped from doing idiotic things by the responsible adults who are the civil servants. Mike, we're out of time, and we are therefore going to go straight to the dumbest take on the news. What is your dumbest take on the news for this week?
I can really do my dumbest take so quickly. So the former spokeswoman for Bernie Sanders, Brianna Joy Gray, posted a video in which she, this is a Harvard educated lawyer we're talking about, right? And she and a prominent person in progressive politics, in which she said that she posted a video from a Palestinian guy who said that who'd been detained by the Israelis apparently, and he said that the worst thing that he saw in detention were the dogs raping Palestinians. The Israelis had trained the dogs to rape Palestinians, and she posted this and then said, "How come people aren't talking about this the latest
This huge story?"
This huge story, and I just don't believe that the Israelis have trained dogs to rape Palestinians. Because
do you know this book?
It's very hard to train a dog.
Do you know this book, Cynical Theories? You know the book Cynical Theories, where they made mock woke arguments and published them in actual academic journals.
Oh yeah, I know the guy. I'm the guy who did
Bogosian. Yeah, so one of the pieces was about the rape culture in dog parks in, I don't remember where, Portland.
That's right.
You know places where you release your dogs. But this woman, I chose this woman also for another show of mine here in Israel, because there was a snippet of her on a video speaking to some sister of an Israeli hostage, and she said to me, "Brianna, I hope that people like you would start believing Israeli rape victims." And she did. People on the audio will not see this. She did this with her eyes. She just rolled her eyes.
Oh, she rolled her eyes?
Okay, she rolled her eyes and say on to the next item, and she was fired from that show, from the Hill. Apparently, there's a moment where the clash of believe all women and believe all Palestinians suddenly meets, and there you have a nuclear fusion and an explosion big enough to cost someone their job on the Hill.
I was not aware that she lost her job over that, but so she believes the guy about the dog rape.
Not the women, but not the women. He believes the dogs, but not the women. Yeah. So my dumbest take is also, it's very short. It's Yair Lapid lost his temper. And you know what he said to Netanyahu? He said, "Nothing will be called on your name. Not a fountain, not a street, nothing. You will be forgotten."
Nothing will be named after you, in other words.
Yeah. So apparently he meant Netanyahu will have no legacy and history will disregard him. And this comes from a איך אומרים ראש ממשלת מעבר, a replacement prime minister for 6 months in a government in which he was, it seemed, just
transitional
government. So, but this coming from Yair Lapid is why is this a dumb mistake for me? Because Yair Lapid is a completely postmodern creature, and so the narrative is the only thing that's important. And he's fighting with Netanyahu over the narrative, and he thinks that they are somehow of the same class. You know, Netanyahu is you can love him, you can hate him, but this is a real larger than life politician, and Yair Lapid is a creation of advertising agencies, basically. And
I saw a clip of him. I didn't have time to track down where it was, but it maybe had been around the time of Netanyahu's speech yesterday. I hadn't seen the clip before, where he just was yelling, "You're a liar, you're a liar, you always lie, go."
Yeah, he said, "You lie like you breathe," which is
lie like you breathe. Yes,
common idiom in Hebrew.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he did it from the Knesset podium. Right after the speech you saw Netanyahu give, the next speaker, the proper order, the protocol in the Knesset is that the next speaker is the head of the opposition, and Lapid is the head of the opposition.
And he did it. That's where he was saying
and
this.
that's his, and you just look at these two men. You look at Netanyahu's speech.
Yeah, like look, the fact of the matter is that I do like Netanyahu. I do. But more than whether I like him, I appreciate, I have a great appreciation of his qualities. That interview that he gave on, of his skills, I'm trying to say, and the interview that he gave on Sunday, I think really showcased his skills. That was a letter perfect interview. Just from a technical point of view, somebody who's dealing with the pressures he had to deal with, the sensitive issues. And we didn't mention I think the most newsworthy thing that he said on Sunday was there will be no settlements, because he went right into the most right-wing TV show in Israel, and they asked him, Mr. Prime Minister, there are a lot of people among us who think that we should be building settlements in Gaza. And he said, no, I don't agree. It's not realistic. It's not. He said flat out. Of course, this is the whole justification for the Tom Friedman, anti-Smotrich and anti-Ben Gvir election now movement and everything. What's the plan for the day after? All of that is that if we don't have the plan for the day after now, then Smotrich and Ben Gvir are going to build their settlements. And here's Netanyahu saying, no, we're not going to have settlements. So that was, and he got a lot of heat from that from the right. That was very, very interesting. But anyway,
and Ynon Magal, who is the host of that show, quoted on his Twitter feed the next morning many angry people that were disappointed by this. So on the right, Netanyahu is getting a lot of pushback for that.
But I want to just agree with you with it. When I didn't know, when I saw the clip of Lapid saying you lie like you breathe, I didn't know that he said it immediately after Netanyahu. I didn't know what the context was for the statement. But I thought when I saw it that I thought Lapid made himself look to just stand at the podium and scream at the prime minister insults is demeaning to the insulter, more demeaning to Lapid than it is to
and he really screamed. He was shouting at the top of his lungs. And I know you saw this little clip.
But do you think that the average is really like is the hostility to Netanyahu so overwhelming that when people see Lapid doing that, they don't agree with us and they think, wow, I think somebody's saying it,
I think he's too influenced by the radical Kaplan demonstrations, which, by the way, as you saw on the Patriots, have gone incredibly wild. They're labeling Netanyahu as the enemy of the Jewish people, the worst thing that has happened to the state, a dictator worth of the end that all dictators eventually meet, and rhetoric that when you look back at what was called the incitement against Rabin, that looks like kids play relative to what these people are shouting daily and nightly. I was in Jerusalem yesterday for some meeting, and this was right near where I went to school as a child. And this is, there's a valley between that place and the Knesset, and you could hear the people with the megaphones at the Knesset shouting that Netanyahu and his horrible family and his terrible wife and his terrible kid, they're ruining the country and they should be taken down. But that minority is very loud, and I think that Yair Lapid has moved closer to them because from the beginning of the war, he made a strategic decision, unlike Benny Gantz, not to join the cabinet, but rather to fight his petit politics from the outside with the aim of bringing down Netanyahu above all else. And Israelis don't like that in the midst of a war. And I think Lapid has made fun of himself. I'll just say one more thing, and I know you saw this clip because I sent it to you, that when Netanyahu was heckled in another speech, when he was heckled by Merav Michaeli, who is the retiring radical feminist head of labor, identity politics, anti-Netanyahu fanatic, Netanyahu just said to her politely, he said, Merav, this is democracy, and I'm here because the people chose me, and you are sitting there because that's where they chose for you to sit. And so, you know, in the end, Netanyahu keeps saying that I represent the majority of Israelis. And indeed, he does in his pursuit of what he calls total victory in this war. And so we have not managed to make this show less than an hour, but it's been, you know what happens to us? We get carried away because it's interesting.
Why do we have to stay within an hour though, anyway?
I don't know, because in my dream, if we need to be slotted in some schedule in the end, then they would.
I think the beauty of the format is that you don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, Joe Rogan, just let loose.
Oh yeah, we don't have to go crazy, but we just keep it within an hour-ish.
Hour-ish. I'll accept that designation from now.
Emphasis on the ish.
And sometimes half an hour-ish. It was a pleasure. I hope that you enjoyed it like we did, and we are going to be here, rain or shine.
Subscribe on our YouTube. Subscribe on our YouTube. We have about 25,000 subscribers on Rumble, but only like 3 subscribers on YouTube.
No. I think we passed 500 on YouTube, but also our views on YouTube have quadrupled in the last 2 or 3 shows.
So if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
Please, we need this.
Do that. Please, if not, Mike,
so many reasons.
Will not be pleased.
Who won't be pleased?
I was going to say that we are going to be here next Tuesday, rain or shine, but I'm suddenly not sure that it's true, Mike, because you are going to be in an undisclosed location in a continent.
I'll try to make it.
So
it will be, but I'll try.
It will be either Mike or we'll have an in-depth special in which I will interview someone for you. Mike, thanks for making the time from your undisclosed location, and I hope to see you next Tuesday.